Hi everyone, and welcome to the last of our afternoon sessions for day 7. We are joined by the amazing Matt Hern, who's over in Perth where Mike just was. So a couple of WA boys joining us this afternoon, which is fantastic to see. Can't wait to get back to that part of Australia again very soon. For people that don't know Matt, he is passionate about helping people afford a life that lights them up. For over 15 years, Matt has advised people in achieving their goals, working as a certified financial planner. Clients he's advised achieve goals such as being mortgage-free by 40, working part-time whilst raising a family, and pursuing dreams to start their own businesses. Matt now exclusively offers money coaching to help people get the most out of life and the money out of your money and afford the life that you love. So Matt, I'll quite happily subscribe to all of those things. If it costs me no money, that would be even better. But I know the reality is I've got to need a little bit of money to do what I want to do in the future. So welcome and thanks for joining and sharing your insights on how to make happy money.
My absolute pleasure, Julia, and thank you so much for inviting me to present at VID21. And I have got an idea for you about how you can afford that, that you just said. But before we get into that, about 3 weeks ago, I was driving home with my daughter and we were singing our lungs out to the musical Hamilton. And Sophie turns to me and says, "Dad, when we go to Hamilton, I'll probably sing the whole way through." And I just laughed. I said, "Yeah, me too, darling." And then Sophie turned to me cheekily and said, "Dad, did you notice I said when we go to Hamilton, not if we go to Hamilton?" Here's the thing. I live in Perth, as Julia just mentioned. Hamilton's only just started in Sydney, performing in Sydney, the only place in the world that Hamilton's being performed live right now. It will be years, in my experience, before a blockbuster musical like that makes its way all the way to Perth. So Sophie doesn't mean that we're going to wait years until it comes to Perth. She means that as a family, we're going to travel to Sydney to make her declaration come to reality. Here's the other important point. Sophie's in high school. She doesn't earn an income. So she's relying on her financial backers, also known as her parents, to bring her declaration to reality. And as you can imagine, flying across thousands of kilometers across the country, flights, accommodation, tickets, this is not a cheap exercise. And a year ago, I had heard of the musical Hamilton, but I had never listened to it, never watched it. So there's no existing saving plan built into the budget for Sophie's declaration there. So where's that money going to come from? Every single day, we have these opportunities, these unplanned opportunities to spend money because we are immersed in an environment, a buffet, I call it, of opportunities to spend our money. And how do we decide what are the opportunities to spend our money on that will bring us the most happiness? Most of us weren't taught about money. Most of us weren't not taught how to make good decisions in an environment where there is abundant opportunity to spend our money and limited resources. So where do we look to learn about how to make those decisions? We look to the people around us and we look to the culture. And the people around us weren't necessarily taught about money, so they didn't necessarily know either. So they're winging it just like we are. And the culture is the kind of the media we consume and the other signals around the culture. And the culture is, here's an interesting quote actually from 1905. So over 115 years old, from W.T. O'Connell, published in an advertising journal called the AdSense Journal. That even back then, advertising was considered to be the gentle art of persuading the public to believe that they want something that they don't need. Now, I would actually hazard a guess to say that that gentle art has turned into much less gentle and much more of a sledgehammer type of an art in that way. So the the culture is actually designed to, and the media and the advertisers are designed to get us to part with our hard-earned money in ways that benefit them, not necessarily that benefit us. And those marketers have spent years training and acquiring those skills to get us to part with that hard-earned money. They've spent much more time learning how to get us to part with our hard-earned money than we've actually spent learning how to make great decisions that are in our best interests rather than them. Since it first aired in about the mid-2000s, about 2008, I think it was, I have been an absolute fan of the Australian show Gruen. Has anyone else seen Gruen? Just whack it in the chat if you've seen Gruen here on Australian TV. One of the things I love, now Gruen is actually a panel TV show of advertising executives. And what those advertising, or people who've got experience in advertising as creative directors or executives. And what they do is they analyze various advertising that's going on. And what I love is it gives me an insight into how the advertisers and the techniques that they're using to get us to part with our hard-earned money, whether it's an explicit ad on a TV or on a billboard or on our phones, or whether it's the way things are aligned in a shopping center. And the key theme that I have found is that, or is the insight I've got, is that what the advertisers and the culture is really good at getting us is needling our insecurities to get us to part with our hard-earned money. So what they're doing is they are appealing to our hardwired, deeply hardwired, millennia-old desires for status and for belonging. Because back in the day, our ability to stay in the group, to belong in the group, and to have status within that group so that we're more likely to stay in the group was an absolute survival instinct. It kept us access to resources when resources were really scarce. And so they're appealing to that desire within us, that insecurity that we are not yet enough to belong, and not yet enough to be loved, and not yet enough to be perceived to be successful. So now that our resources are much less scarce than that we are, I think, they're still appealing to that hardwired desire because it works and it's hardwired into us. But now that resources are a lot less scarce to us, I think what we're discovering is that that all the stuff, that training that we've been done by the culture about how to spend our money under the promise that it will bring us happiness, status, more importantly, the happiness, make us happy. I think more of us are discovering that stuff is just filling our houses, emptying our accounts, and leaving us with a hole inside of us. So what we're then finding is that we are working harder and harder for these growing commitments that the culture is getting us to do, and getting stuck in jobs that we don't particularly like. So expanding on that quote from W.T. O'Connor earlier, Robert Quinlan expanded it in 1928, and Dave Ramsey, American financial commentator, has popularized another version of it. Here's my, you probably need the actual quote. So for me, a real summary of the society we're at right now is that we are enticed to spend money, to buy things we don't need with money we don't have, and so we can get stuck in jobs we don't like. Does anyone just pop in the chat? I keep putting my hand up because I'm accustomed to do it, but you put your hand up if you want. But more importantly, please throw in the chat right now. Do you know anyone who perhaps is stuck in a job they don't like because they feel that they can't afford to leave? I certainly can remember being one of those. And the hamster on the treadmill, Sue, absolutely. That's very much the case. I remember back in my very first career, I was a petroleum engineer coming out of university. This is in the mid-90s. And my first placement was in the drilling team, and I went offshore in the Timor Sea, 3-hour chopper ride out into the Timor Sea. And I remember having an absolute shock because I was meeting people who were earning well above the average Australian wage, a good chunk of money, and had most of their careers, but they're in their 40s and their 50s, and they were miserable, and they were telling me that they couldn't afford to leave. And that broke my heart. I was thinking, well, wow, what's going on in the world if you're earning so much money but can't afford to leave a job that's making you miserable? And that was one of the early seeds that actually planted for me about learning more about money and how to make good decisions that actually led to me changing careers 20 years ago into financial planning, because I discovered I like that a little bit more than working offshore on a drilling rig or a production facility. So what I want to do in today's presentation of Happy Money is, I guess, is share with you what I have been spending 20 years trying to work out since over 20 years, since I was a graduate engineer, try to work out a little bit of a spending guide. Like, what is the best way to use my limited resources to get the most happiness out of my money? Because I believe that we are all born with abundant potential for joy and contribution. I deeply believe that we all have the ability to live a flourishing life. And so I'm really curious about how we go about spending our money wisely to live that flourishing life. And what I've already shared a little bit right now is it's kind of countercultural to what we are trained to do, spending on stuff. So one of the first things that often comes to people's mind is that we can get a little bit of a FOMO come up, a fear of missing out when I'm talking to people about this, is that they can think, hey, Matt's going to tell us where to spend our money to make us happier, but I'm already stretched. Where's that money going to come from? And that's a fair thought to have if you're having that thought. It's a really common thought that people have when I'm working with them on money coaching. And the reason it's fair is because when you think of possibilities of what you can cut so that you can allocate money to what brings you more happiness, only the memorable stuff comes to mind. So, of course, you don't want to cut the memorable stuff, because I imagine the memorable stuff is actually the meaningful stuff that already brings you happiness. What many of us don't necessarily realize is we've probably got a bunch of forgettable spending, and that's why it's not coming to mind. So, and forgettable spending that, not only can you not forget it, but perhaps it's forgettable because it was low impact on your happiness and your joy. It maybe raised your standard of living, filled your house, but didn't actually fill your soul. So where the money is going to come from for this is we're going to swap forgettable spending for memorable spending. We're going to swap low impact spending for higher impact spending. So that natural fear that, by swapping this around, that you might miss out on doing the things that you love and protect the people that you love, I'm hoping that you can still probably do those things. We're just going to swap low impact to higher impact spending right now. What I'd love for you to do now is actually look away from the screen. Gaze off into the distance, or if you've got a piece of paper in front of you, gaze down at the piece of paper. And what I'd invite you to do is visualize that you have lived a long, happy, fulfilling life. And you're at the end of that life. You've lived a long, happy, fulfilling life. You're at the end of that life. And lots of memories are flooding your mind that remind you of how fulfilling and memorable your life has been. As you're visualizing that long and happy life and thinking about those memories, I'd love you on that piece of paper, just jot down some of the headlines that prompt you about what those memories may be that you think would remind you that you've lived a long and happy life. Give you a couple of minutes to do that right now. I imagine you've got lots of memories flooding back to you, and that's beautiful. What I'd love for you to encourage you to do right now is just have a quick look through that list. And next to each of those memories, could you write, if it was more of an experience, a memory of an experience that's coming back to you, write a little E next to it. If it was a memory of something you owned, like a possession, write a little P. If it's a mixture of both, just write EP. Just quickly tally that up right now. So if it's an experience, write E. If it's something you owned or a possession, write P, or a blend of both, EP. And just quickly tally that up, and in the chat box, could you please write, if it was 5 experiences and 1 possession, could you just please write 5E and 1P, or 4E, 1P, 2EP, for example, just in the chat box. I'd love to get a sense of what are the memories that you imagine will warm your heart at the end of your long and fulfilling life. Great, thanks, Julia. Mostly experiences there. Mostly experiences from Sue there as well. Excellent. And thanks, Elizabeth. Yeah, so we've got like lots of 4 and 5 E's and only one or 2 possessions, and or a blend of both in that regard. And that doesn't surprise me at all. Have any of you heard of the advice, perhaps in the media you've heard, or the research that came out in 2003, that experiences give us more happiness than things? Just write a yes in the chat box if you've heard about that, that experiences give us more happiness than things. Great, all right, got a bit of a mix there. In 2003, professors and researchers Leif van Boven and Thomas Gilovich published their seminal research to test that hypothesis about, well, what gives us more happiness between possessions and things. They called it to do or to have. That is the question. And they've got lots of pop culture references through all of their research. I love reading it. That research was in 2003 and has spawned thousands of research papers since then to really understand the characteristics of experiences and the characteristics of things that make us happy. But their initial finding was that actually we tend to get more experience, more joy, and more moment-to-moment happiness and boosts in our mood when we spend on an experience rather than when we buy a possession and spend on that. Here's the fascinating thing to me about that. That is the opposite of our cultural conditioning, where we are conditioned by the culture that having more stuff, more, bigger and better stuff is actually a measure of our success, a measure of our status, and we can measure our self-worth from it. So the research is in effect backing up that feeling inside of us that we've got a hold inside of it, but it is opposite to our cultural conditioning. It is also opposite to a little bit of other conditioning, where we find it much more easy to value tangible objects than we do to value intangible experiences and services that we might engage with to help us live a happier and easier life. And what the researchers have found is that because of that difference in the ease to value, is that we also have this conditioning in our brain that actually we're going to get more value for money if we buy something that we can hold, touch, and see. But actually the research is showing totally the opposite. So I've come across a lot of people who have heard about this experiences versus things, but inside them, it is so culturally ingrained that they're going to get more value from a tangible object. It's really difficult to break that nexus. So if you're noticing that kind of tension within you, that's normal, and that's really what we want to explore. And so, well, the research is saying that how can we break that particular nexus there? As I mentioned, Van Boven and Gilovich's research has spawned thousands of research papers. It's a beautiful area of psychology that is almost extremely difficult to keep up with, really, and to understand those depths of characteristics that will make us happier. Concurrent to that, what I have found is that the conversation in the culture around all the different elements of our well-being that we can invest in has really been flourishing as well. So I'm really curious to hear in the chat box, what areas of well-being have you been hearing about that and you've been encouraged to invest in? So just quickly list them, what those particular areas are. Yes, sir, you are 100% normal. And I love you for it. So any areas of well-being? Oh, yeah, Julie, you're normal too. So what areas of well-being have you come across? So some of the common areas of well-being that that one particularly close to my heart that I've is the mental well-being space. There's a lot of encouragement to be investing in our mental well-being. We're encouraged to invest in our physical well-being, self-care. In fact, there's been some really wonderful presentations in this whole VID21 conference around trying to encourage us to invest in those other areas of our well-being to make us happier. There's psychological well-being. I think I mentioned that, mental well-being. So there's lots of areas of well-being coming up. So for me personally, in this journey that I've been on in my life to try to come up with a little bit of a spending guide for myself, and then ultimately for you as well, is to work out, well, all these areas I've been encouraged to invest in with well-being, plus all this research that's coming out around where to spend our money for happiness. How do I make sense of it all? How do I prioritize all of it? Because the culture was telling me to prioritize all this stuff. This sort of emerging culture is telling me to prioritize that. How do I make sense of it? I mentioned before that I believe in that we all have this abundant potential to live a flourishing life. So in psychology, I've been really drawn to the definitions around flourishing. Perhaps one of the most common ones that you might know is from Dr. Martin Seligman in his book, Flourish. He talked about the PERMA model, which is an acronym that stands for positive emotions, engagement, which is kind of like a flow state, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. And Dr. Seligman refers to them as, Martin Seligman refers to them as building blocks to flourishing. But he's not the only one. You know, Carol Riff has got one, Corey Keyes has got another one for thriving in there. And even Dr. Martin Seligman has extended PERMA to be PERMA Plus. And a Melbourne couple of researchers have also called it PERMA with a silent H at the end to capture that, well, actually, health is a real building block there, and optimism as well. So for me, in trying to create a sense of an overarching context for how I make that sense, what I settled on is I came across the World Health Organization has a definition of quality of life. So the WHO is what it is, the World Health Organization quality of life. And I've come to really resonate with that. The WHO has 6 domains in its full dimension, but what they observed is that 2 of those domains that dictate a quality of life and living a best life can be collapsed into 2 of the other domains. So really there's 4 major domains in what they say is a quality of life. And for me, that really resonates with me, because for me, I see money as well as time as being 2 of the key resources that we have available to us to make decisions about in order to facilitate a life we love, the life that lights us up, and a flourishing life. So for me, the WHO, the World Health Organization's quality of life, is a great way to look at it. So what I want to walk you through using that as a context is some of the ways that we can spend our money to boost our quality of life. So what I'd love you to do, if you've got a blank piece of paper there, is smack bang in the middle of the page, just draw a picture, like a quick picture of you with a big smiling face, of course. So just in the middle of the page, little picture of you with a big smiling face. Hopefully it looks something a little bit like this. Hopefully it actually looks better. I had to work really hard to even get to do that. This is not my skill set. When I'm working with clients to help them manage their money and get more savings, oh, thanks, Sue. I worked really hard on that though. So when I'm working with people who are trying to have savings goals and save money, one of the really common areas that will come to mind that they say that they can cut is something like a gym membership or personal training will be another one they come to mind. And they say, oh, well, I can do exercise at home. And my first reaction to that is, will you exercise at home? And maybe I'm projecting a little bit of me onto them, because I don't. I have tried for 20 plus adult years to try to get into an exercise habit at home. I won't get into it. So it's taken me 10 years to work out what works for me. And I need a gym membership and I need to do group fitness classes. So one of the reasons I raise that is because one of the 4 dimensions that you might imagine that we're encouraged to do is our physical health. So our physical health is one of the 4 dimensions that we need to look to of quality of life. So looking at that, if that's one of the major areas of life that enable us to have a quality of life, a flourishing life, then it seems to me to be a great idea that we actually invest in that rather than cut that from our spending just because we could do it at home. If you need to be exercising, and we know that from the mental health research that's been coming out, that exercise and good quality sleep, which I put under the physical domain, are actually great enablers and protective factors for our psychological health in that regard. So when you're looking at spending money, I'd say giving yourself permission to invest in your physical health and invest in ways that support you in keeping that habit in place. That's a really great way to invest in. So if you've been inclined to cut, like some of my clients have been, to do that. Now, one caution right here is that if we say, all right, Matt said go to the gym, immediately we can think we need to go out shopping and get some brand new fancy cool activewear. You know, say from Lorna Jane, Lululemon, Rebel Sport, in that particular regard. So real caution here is we need to exercise, we want to look cool. And that desire to look cool is based on the culture conditioning about belonging and fitting in. So if that's come up naturally for you, and I wouldn't be surprised if it does, because it's so culturally ingrained in us that we need to look a particular way if we're going out exercising, just notice that thought in that particular regard. Notice that thought about what you feel that you need just to invest in that domain, because maybe we don't need that stuff, and maybe that's one of those elements. So the more expensive clothing compared to what we can perhaps get at a department store, like say Kmart or Big W, maybe that's some of that forgettable spending that's not actually contributing to our quality of life and our flourishing. It's just a possession that's needling our insecurity. Maybe that's some of the stuff that we can cut to find the money to afford the higher impact spending that we can build our happiness. So that neatly leads on to one of the other domains, is that perhaps that instinct for us to say, oh, we have to look cool and have the more expensive activewear in order to invest in our exercise, is based on the cultural conditioning of needling that insecurity that we need that kind of fashionable clothing and more expensive premium clothing in order to fit in and belong. So one of our best So the other really important domain is the psychology domain. So some of our best immunity, or psychological health, which incorporates for me the emotional health of our feelings and also the mental health of our thoughts. So if you heard those different thoughts, for me, I sort of bundle them both in our psychological domain in that particular regard. So given that their culture and the advertisers and the capitalist culture is really needling out insecurities, to me, some of the best immunity to that kind of advertising and that cultural signaling at what it means to be successful and belong is actually our sense of self, our sense that I am enough and that I have enough. So our sense of self and our sense of sufficiency. So investing in those particular areas, to me, seems to be an amazingly high impact way to invest our money, because it not only gives us that immunity to the advertising and the signaling to buy stuff that perhaps doesn't bring us joy, but it also, from the mental health research, it makes us really resilient to all of life's challenges in that regard, and enables us to thrive in all of life's situations that throw at us in that regard. So for me, I forgot to provide the distinction before. A lot of the research, I break into basics and boosters. So there's the basics foundations that if they're not in place, they can actually drag down your happiness and counteract any benefit you might get from the boosters. So I sort of split some of the initiatives into basics and boosters. So to me, investing in that emotional well-being, that psychological well-being, of that sense of I am enough and I have enough, to me, is one of those basics that enables us to thrive. What I'm curious to hear from you now, sorry, Sue, I just saw your comment. Yes, I'm the same. I have been wearing the same active gear for over 10 years. Thank goodness it's got a drawstring because the elastic's gone, but hey, it works. So in that particular regard, my ex-wife laughs at me, the fact that I'm always wearing the same clothes whenever she picks the kids up. We have a good relationship. So what I'd love to hear from you in the chat box is, what are the other interventions, or that's what the psychological term, but what are the other techniques that you have heard of in that psychological quality of life domain? So whether it's mental health or emotional health, what are the techniques that you've heard that can perhaps build your sense of self, your sense that I am enough, and boost your happiness in the regard of the psychological domain? Just type them into the chat box. Some of the other techniques that you've heard of. Hint, hint, if you've been following along VID21, there's already been a couple shared in earlier presentations. Oh, thanks, Sue. So what are the other techniques that you have heard for investing in your psychological, your health, psychological health, like your well-being? Got it? Excellent. Yeah, meditation, absolutely. Journaling, yeah, great technique. Yep, walking, yep, that physical health is the protective factor for our psychological health. And also when we're stressed, investing in cardio can be a great way to do it. So yeah, absolutely, gratitude practice. But you guys are clearly top of the class, because all the ones that you have mentioned are some of the most researched interventions in positive psychology. PPIs, they call them, positive psychology interventions, that are the most researched as saying, yeah, these are really, really impactful. And so they're some of the strongest factors for that, investing in that basics for your psychological well-being. One of the boosters that is coming out from the research into money and happiness and looking into that experiences versus things is, oh, I have skipped my notes. No, I'm right. One of the boosters, one of the threads that comes through is investing in things that are related to our character in that regard. So say I'm Seligman's flourish model, you might be things that would give you meaning or get you into the engagement piece of PERMA, where you're in the flow state. So your hobbies and pastimes that really you can just get lost in and get into that flow state with, investing in that is a really good idea. So this is where I think the distinction between experiences and things, you can really see the blurred line between it. Because if you're buying a possession or an object that is totally aligned to one of your hobbies, that you just are lit up by this hobby and you can get into that flow state, that makes sense to spend extra money on a slightly more premium version of it. So if you're really into music, having good quality headphones makes a lot of sense. It doesn't make a lot of sense for me to do that, because I just don't have the ear for it, and it's not one of the things that lights me up. So that's one of the areas, I guess, I would say that when I'm cautioning before about, well, actually, do you need a more premium version, or can you get away with the lowest cost version of some of the possessions? This is one of those distinctions where you give yourself permission to invest in that slightly more premium thing, because you are actually going to get the value out of it if it's aligned to your character in that regard. So going back to the example about activewear, if you tell me that you actually buy sustainable, ethically manufactured activewear that is fully compostable, biodegradable, because that's totally aligned to your value system or your character, and you're happy to spend a premium money on that for that activewear rather than the cheaper stuff, go for it, because that's aligned to your value. If that's a true narrative rather than the I want to look cool narrative, that's a really good distinction that's emerging. And this is one of the less researched areas of it, but that's what is emerging from the research. And another example that I loved, I'm interpreting here, Julia, something that you said in your presentation, in sharing with Gabrielle Dolan and Magnetic Stories. You shared a beautiful story of helping your stepdaughter Riley with face care, and you talked about the Love Your Skin brand. Now, you didn't actually say this, so forgive me if I'm getting it wrong, but I interpreted that, for you loved the story of Love Your Skin, and that it was someone who was a teenager, and it's role modeling to Riley around the power and potential of what Riley can do in her life. That really resonated, as a parent, that really resonated home to me, and I could sort of see it in your eyes when you were telling that story. But it's a brand started by teens. I checked out the website. It's all natural ingredients. It's Australian made. It is not tested on animals. So can you see those kind of values-based themes are emerging there? So investing in something that's so aligned, that's another great example for me of something that is a really a way to give yourself permission to spend money in those particular areas because it lights you up and gets you into flow. So maybe can you think of a little hobby right now, maybe just write a little note under there that perhaps is something that you might want to give yourself permission to invest some money in that would boost your well-being, that perhaps you've been hesitating because you've got this story that you shouldn't be spending money on that particular area because it's wasteful. The third area of the World Health Organization's quality of life domains that is in there is the environmental area. Now, environmental is a really big category for the WHO. It's the where you live, the things like how safe you might feel in that particular environment. Do you have somewhere to live? Do you have utilities? But one of the really big domains that sort of links in here is the environmental domain of mastery over your money or autonomy over your money. And through the research that in financial well-being space, so we talked about like mental well-being space and health well-being, in the financial well-being space, what is emerging is that this is an absolute basic to get into place. That if you don't have financial well-being, it can really drag down your happiness and counteract all the interventions that you might be doing in other spaces in that regard. And what it is that feeling, if you're living, say, pay to pay, feeling like you've never got any money, a bill comes in and you cuss because you're not sure where that money is going to come from, or an unexpected expense comes up and it buffets you around and throws you around and you're stressed about where that money is going to come from. That can give you a sense of being in survival mode, that lack of that feeling like I'm not in control of my money, it's controlling me, money's coming in and out, I don't feel in control, and it can really feel like we're in absolute survival mode because money is such a key facilitator of all the experiences that we love in life. Not having control, is that bottom rung of the Maslow's hierarchy of need. So if you're feeling that way, you're certainly not alone. And of course, you're not alone because, as I mentioned earlier, most of us were not taught about how to manage our money. So what's the best way to go about doing it? So it's not a surprise to me in an environment where we're immersed in a spending buffet of abundant temptation and easy credit that we struggle to make great decisions and actually struggle to stay above water in that particular regard. In fact, research from the Reserve Bank of Australia shows that about a quarter of Australians are accruing credit card interest on their credit cards every single month. So they're going backwards every single month. And research in 2018 from the Australian Bureau of Statistics showed that about half of Aussies are living pay to pay. And this is like 2018. And lots of other research done out there confirms that. Research conducted by Fidelity in late 2019, but published earlier in 2020, just before the pandemic. So this is before the pandemic, showed that about a quarter of Aussies are stressing and worrying about money daily. About another quarter are stressing weekly. So that's a total of a half are stressing at least weekly about money. And 2/3 of us are worrying about money at least monthly in that regard. So if you're feeling this particular way, if you're feeling a bit of a lack of control of your money, like you're living pay to pay, you're certainly not alone in that particular regard. But as you can see, it's stressful and it drags you down. And so what I know from personal experience of working with people is that can really pervade their entire life. So as a basic, money as a basic to boost your whole quality of life and flourish in life, investing in your financial well-being is one of those real basics that makes a lot of sense to invest in. And I guess one point I'd like to make there is that it's also okay to be not okay with money because we weren't taught about it in that particular regard. So what I've got for you is on my website, there's a free course called The 6 Ingredients to Saving More Whilst Still Enjoying Life. That you can subscribe for. Just go to the front page of my website. I can probably even put it into the chat box for you guys now. if you want to get a bit more control over your money, that's a free course to enable you to do that. If we go back to our memories from earlier, I imagine that these are the memories that came to mind to remind you that that you lived a long and flourishing life. I imagine a lot of them actually fitted into another category of social. So that's the other big category in quality of life, and certainly comes through in all of the flourishing models from positive psychology, is that, and this is also the strongest thread that's coming through in all the money and happiness research that has been flourishing in the last 15 years, is that experiences that connect us with other people is one of the ones that can be the greatest boost to our happiness, and also is one of the greatest explainers of why experiences boost our happiness more than possessions in that particular regard. So, and it's also the social well-being comes through a lot in the mental health research about our connection to others is also a protective factor, and also a supportive factor if we're struggling with our mental health in that regard. So investing in our social well-being, by connections with others, is really important in that regard. So one way to think about it is when we're having experiences, the part of the experience that gives us the boost, the money happiness of the experience, is actually the connection with other people. It's not necessarily where we went, the quality of food that we had, or what we wore in that particular regard. What probably we can remember is the connection with a person in that regard. So that's one of the things to really think in mind. And if you're looking at trying to get more boosting out of your social experiences, the thread that's weaving through from the research is it's experiences that are shared with others and experiences that are shareable with others. So by the shareable, think of it as relatable, in that it's an experience. So here in Perth, Rottnest Island is a great holiday destination just off of Perth. Lots of Aussies have been to Rottnest Island. So talking about our Rottnest Island family holiday with other friends who they can probably relate to that. So we're getting not only the buzz from the experience of going to Rottnest Island with our family. So we've gone there, we've gone with our family, so that's shared, and we're telling other people about it. So we're getting like a triple boost there. And when we book it in advance, we're getting the benefit of anticipation, which also comes through with experiences less than with possessions. So that's enough. So really thinking about and giving yourself permission to invest in experiences that are shared and shareable with others, and knowing that that's what it's about, mostly with that experience. So one of my clients I was working with, she was based in Melbourne, we're working just before Melbourne came out of its big lockdown. And we were talking about this, and her lifestyle, she noticed a lot of her money was actually spent on going to cafes with friends. And she told me a story just out of a lockdown, is that she went out to a cafe for the first time, really excited to catch up with her friends straight after Melbourne came out of lockdown. And she said, and a friend said to her, "Hey, you want to have brunch as well while we're here?" And my client paused, and she thought, actually, what's making this really happy for me is catching up with her. I don't need to spend that extra $20 on the avo on toast, which coincidentally wasn't a cliche. She actually was planning to have that. Is actually better spent on this other holiday that's going to really light me up in that particular regard. And I can have a banana when I get home. So that can be one of the ways that understanding this can help you swap a little bit of low impact spending into the high impact spending, and not actually miss out on any of the joy in particular in life. So when you're feeling lousy and feeling like a little bit of comfort shopping or retail therapy is coming around, one of the great things to do, some free alternatives are swap retail therapy for cardio, swap it for connection with other people. And the other thing is to swap it for contribution, because shouting that friend a coffee is both connecting, and we get a buzz out of shouting someone a coffee. So that's one of the great ways to get more happiness out of your experience, rather than retail therapy buying a possession that you might not actually get any value out of. So the four major domains to invest in were the physical domain, psychological domain, the money mastery and the environmental domain, and the social domain. And look at the basics that will actually enable you to have a strong, robust quality of life in that area. And because not investing in the basics can actually drain your well-being and counteract all the benefits in the boosters area. But then there's the boosters as well that you can build on. Now, many of those happy money basics and boosters that I've shared, they may actually seem really, really obvious to you when you're hearing them, particularly in this context. Like, well, duh, what has Matt told me that I haven't heard before? So that's cool. What I'd love for you to maybe use as an opportunity to reflect on perhaps where maybe you're hesitating to spend money in that particular regard, and maybe you're hesitating because of what I shared before, is some of that resistance that we might have because it's countercultural in that regard. So some of our resistance might be, this is countercultural. It's less tangible. I can't put my money on that experience. I can't put my money on investing in that course to help me learn meditating, or that coaching to help me learn to keep me on track with building a gratitude habit in that particular regard. So that's okay. So they might be obvious to you, but see, perhaps use this as a reflection of where you can perhaps swap from low impact spending to high impact spending in that regard. So now, really curious, what should I do? Really curious to hear your perspective. Write in the chat box. We want you to swap from low impact spending to high impact spending to get your basics and boosters. Now, I'm really curious to find out about Sophie's declaration that we should all go as a family to Hamilton over in Sydney sooner rather than later, which is going to be $1,000. What do you think I should do? Love to hear your advice. And why, actually. I'd love to hear why you think I should go. Well, it seems to be a resounding suggestion. Now, I don't know if that's because everybody who's in the chat box is actually a musical fan and everyone's saying to go, but you're absolutely spot on. And here's why. It makes a hell of a lot of sense for me to find ways to start an automatic savings plan to save those extra $1,000 for Hamilton, because I grew up in a musical family. One of my fondest memories that warmed my heart jumping on a bus with everybody else from youth theatre in the country town in South Australia I grew up in, and catching a bus all the way to Melbourne to go and see the musicals, the blockbuster musicals of Cats, Les Mis, and Phantom of the Opera. That's some of the warmest memories for me. And so indoctrinating my own children in musicals, that's something that's very close to my heart, and it brings me such joy hearing Sophie singing along at the top of her lungs to Hamilton and that shared experience. And my sister even said, hey, she'll fly up from Tasmania to come and see us. So you can see that type of experience weaves in so many things that are close to my character as being a family that loves musicals. It's all about a shared and shareable experience with the people that are nearest and dearest to me. So you are absolutely right. I need to cut a bunch of things out that perhaps will bring me less joy, because that will totally light me up and be an experience that warms my heart after living a long and fulfilling life. So thanks very much for joining me. I hope you had some great insights about how you can get more life out of your money and live a life that lights you up.